Today we are going to sand and polish these dice, and they are ugly. Look, we've got concave faces, raised bumps. They're rough and they need a lot of work, but we're going to make them look like this, and we're not doing it the old-fashioned way. We are using a Dremel. Let's take a look at all the things you're going to need to sand and polish your dice with a Dremel. First, of course, you need a Dremel. I will link the one that I have in the description so you can check out all the specs on it, but it just has the switch, the control here, so that you can easily change speed. I generally keep it at the lowest setting. Sometimes I'll speed it up if I'm sanding something big and flat. More on that later. You're also going to need this head. It just screws in and attaches to the chuck and allows your sandpaper to Velcro on and off. It usually comes in a kit like this and contains a bunch of sponges and sandpaper grits, various harshities, a couple of polishing and buffing pieces, as well as extra, way down in there, as well as an extra head and bit. This screws onto this, and then this is what goes in the chuck. Future Yo here, just reporting to say that I tried to change this out recently and forgot that that bit in my hand actually does not fit in the chuck of this Dremel. So make sure you read your Dremel specifications to find out what the shank size is on the bit. I'm actually using the screw-in head from a 1-inch polishing set, and this on the drill is a 2-inch polishing set. So you may need to get both. You may be able to find one that has the shank size that fits your chuck. Just double check the sizes before you buy anything so you're not stuck with something that doesn't work. I was just fortunate enough to have one already that worked. I'm using the smaller version instead of this big one. In addition to those, for the polishing, you'll need these sponges. These are automotive polishing sponges, and they are 2-inch base, and they taper to about 2.5 at the front here. The green is level 1, that is your harshest sponge, followed by blue, which is level 2, and yellow would be level 3. As you can see, the green does most of the work for you when you are polishing these, and again, more on that later. It also has these buffing heads, which I will use sometimes after this step, after I've inked, when I'm going to shoot my dice to put them on the website. You'll also need some of these polishing compounds. Now, there's 2 different kinds. I prefer this Rolite brand. I discovered these through a YouTube video when I was doing resin countertops at my old house. I needed to shine them back up to their finish from the original pour, and they recommended 3M, but I was not willing to spend $60 a bottle on 3M, and so I bought these instead. There's level 1, 2, and 3 for these. Level 1 you're going to use with the green sponge, level 2 is going to go with the blue sponge, and level 3 will go with that yellow sponge. These, as it says on here, there it is, ideal for painted surfaces. I tried this type first. While I was really happy with the results from that one, I couldn't help but let curiosity get the better of me and try this one. Now, these are ideal for plastic and acrylic. Epoxy is basically a form of plastic or acrylic, and so I am actually really happy with steps 2 and 3 from this type, and step 1 from the for painted surfaces. That one and this 2 and 3 seem to work the best together. I have on occasion mixed the 2 of these together because this is quite thick and this is a little bit thinner, so it makes it easier to work with, and I still get the same results as just using this, but it does stretch this a little bit farther since I'm not really fond of this, and I probably won't buy this again, but I will continue to buy this. You can buy these all in a set, so you can buy all 3 at once, or you can buy individuals as I've done with this. I use this one the most, and then these two after it. So once that one is gone and these two are gone, I won't purchase any more of those, but I will purchase more of this, and I will purchase more of, wrong one, this one, more of this 2 and 3, more of this 2 and 3. So I will be using 1 for painted surfaces and 2 and 3 for plastic and acrylic. The plastic and acrylic also comes with this attached to it, that set. So the one that says ideal for plastic and acrylic has this plastic and acrylic cleaner along with it. I haven't used it much to clean dice or anything of that nature, so more on this another time. I also like to use these wool buffing pads for a finish after I've done all the rest of this stuff to polish it up. Sometimes I'll use one of these in here to clean it up, but I do like to use these to clean up the ink, specifically these little ones here. And again, you'll see all this in action, but I like these, and you'll see why, as opposed to those round fluffy cotton heads. Most people recommend those when you're using a Dremel, but I prefer to use these, and you'll understand why once we get to the polishing step after inking. You're also going to need a respirator and a set of goggles. Now you're going to need these because sanding, of course, it's spitting out all kinds of resin dust. Nobody needs to be breathing resin dust. But additionally, you'll want both the respirator and the goggles because there is a projectile hazard, as I have launched these from my Dremel spinning many times, especially anything with a pointy corner. If you tip it just right, so especially in the polishing and especially with a pointy corner, if you tip it just right, it can hook the edge of that and send it flying. Most of the time it sends it flying away from my face as I try to stay on this side. That's the way that my Dremel rotates. So as it rotates this way away from me, if I'm doing this, it'll grab it and send it that way. But if I get low down here or over here, it launches it right to my face. And you want to make sure that you have your face protected so that you don't get this in your face. Now you're probably asking, yo, can I use something like this, a little handheld Dremel, to do the trick? Yes, you can use one of these little Dremels, but they will tire your hands faster. I have one for traveling. I take it with me when I go places and I want to take dice with me to work on. I'll take this, usually just to polish. I'm not usually sanding because that requires the respirator and all that jazz, but if I'm cleaning up inking or I need to polish some to get them ready for the shop, I'll take this and those dice and call it good.
Future Yo here from the editing room. Just wanted to update that yes, there is a mount for a desk for this size of a Dremel type tool. So if you have something this size, you can actually mount it to a desktop surface, just like I have my large Dremel mounted. Still use all the same precautions. You probably just have to use a smaller size bit, probably the 1-inch bit. Also, if you notice in the bottom of the tray here, I point to the sponge a minute ago. That red sponge there is the 1-inch size. So that's where that first shank that I mentioned came from, that I'm using on the big Dremel with the 2-inch head. So you can potentially get the 2-inch head. I just don't know how well something this small can spin and handle that type of an object, or that size of an object spinning on its own power. Additionally, I just wanted to say that that plastic cleaner that I said I haven't used much yet, I have, since recording this, used it quite a bit, and I actually really like it. It's my favorite thing to clean off dice after I've removed all the extra ink, to get rid of alcohol and paint residue. It is just chef's kiss. Perfect. Let's continue.
This is the other thing I use the handheld for, is to sand these surfaces. This is hard to hold up against the wheel. And just for size comparison, this black circle is the size of the sandpaper, so holding this on there, like, this is bigger than the sandpaper. But also it's hard to get a nice finish and smooth on the giant wheel. It bogs it down, it rotates really slow. I have to speed it up. So by using the little one on something big like this, so if you make jars or trays, any kind of dice holder that's big and unwieldy. You're not going to want to use the round sandpaper on the 2-inch disc. You're going to want to use something smaller like that 1-inch in a handheld form to clean those up. You're also going to need gloves just to protect your hands. I know a lot of people sand without gloves, but it is a safety hazard to handle resin, especially wet, without gloves if you're using your hands a lot, and especially if you're like me. I'm picking my nails. I am a nail biter. I'm terrible about keeping my hands in good shape. So there's lots of little cracks and crevices for germs to get into, and if you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time with those very wet hands while you're wet sanding your dice, which we will be doing, any of those germs can get inside and cause an infection, which I did have one right after I first started making dice, and my finger swelled up, was ugly. I had to take antibiotics. So always wear your gloves when you are wet sanding or sanding dice, period. You want to protect your hands. On that note, you'll also want a bowl of water. I keep this old bottle that I just keep refilling from my tap. Reduce, reuse, recycle. And this old Tupperware container, Rubbermaid, whatever it is, to put water in, and I can dip the dice in to make sure that they're adequately wet when I'm wet sanding the dice on the drill. I also keep a little spray bottle here. This is just a cheap dollar store travel spray bottle for a nice light mist. I don't even know if the camera picks it up, but there, just a little bit of water if I just need to moisten the sandpaper before we get started. The last thing you're going to want is this mount that my Dremel is in, so you're not holding it and having to literally handle the vibrations from this running the whole time. It can be really tiring on your hands, especially if you have any kind of arthritis issues or your hands just tire easily, because I mean it's vibrating at a pretty high number of RPMs. I don't know the exact number, but it's pretty high. This mount that I found, it just clamps to the desk, so it has this clamp underneath here, and you tighten that up, which looks like I could use a little tightening, and then this here to tighten the swivel joint, the ball joint, and then these here. It does come with metal washers. I replaced my metal washers with neoprene washers, and they are, oh, I lost one. These are the washers I picked up at Home Depot. They're just 5/16 inch. There were 3 of them in there and I've lost one. These are the washers I used to replace the metal washers. It tightens, and they do not require as much tightening as often as the metal washers did. And it just does absorb a little bit more of that vibration. So the Dremel just sits right in here. You don't need to hold it. All you have to do is switch it on and off. And if you have a speed adjuster, adjust your speed. And you're good to go. So once you have all of these things, you're ready to sand and polish with your Dremel. Now you just need a set of dice. Also a work surface, of course. And do be careful if you decide to get the mount to mount your Dremel, which you're probably going to want to do. Make sure that your table can accommodate this entire clamp. I did not check that. I ended up buying a whole new desk, which worked out for me well. But if you don't have a thin desk with no lip, you want to make sure you don't have a lip. This needs to be totally flat underneath here. So if you have an old desk that has any molding, or like an old table you're using, make sure there is no decorative edge here, that it's just flat underneath, flat on top, and flat on the edge. The only other thing I do is I keep this old box from gloves to put my used sandpaper bits in. So once they're expired, I just throw them in there. And by expired, I mean I've sanded the ever-loving daylights out of them. I pop them in there. The last thing I did not mention was this jar of blue liquid. This is just cheap windshield washer fluid from like Walmart at like $2 for a giant bottle. And I use it sometimes when I forget to get new water. This is handy. I can just dump this out into the dirty water and put clean washer fluid in there, and it works just fine to rinse the dice of any debris. So the process that I use when sanding dice varies depending on the state of each set and how new the mold is, how many mold marks there may be on the set from the wear and tear of use on the mold. So I generally will start at a 1500. This one does not happen to be labeled on the back like these two, but I will generally start at 1500 grit and then do 2000 grit and sometimes 3000 grit if I feel like it needs it. Generally 2000 is enough. Particularly bad, or the mold I should say, is particularly bad and the set needs a lot of work to rehab, I'll start with the 1200, then do the 15, and then do the 2000, sometimes 3000, and even sometimes 5000 if I feel like it needs it, just to shine it up and make sure I've gotten rid of all of those tiny scuff marks from the sanding. You want to make sure you change these often and keep them clean, hence the spray bottle. For spraying, you can just stop, remove it from the drill, dip it in the water to wash it off, and then put it back on the drill. That's also acceptable, and I will do sometimes if it's feeling pretty caked. I also keep this old makeup brush handy that as the Dremel is spinning, I can just hold this on there. If I'm dry sanding, which I typically only do with Masters or this 1200 grit, I'll just let it rotate and kind of do this with the brush, and as it's rotating it cleans everything off. Sometimes I can just hold it still and it'll clean it off really well too. Okay, so let's glove up and sand ourselves a set of dice. We are going to sand I'm going to remove my watch. We are going to sand and polish this set of dice, which I chose specifically because it's from a newer mold that I made, but I really goofed up on the mold here, and there's a big chunk missing. Let's see if I can get that to focus there. There we go. There's a big chunk missing out of the mold, so it has this big raised surface. The mold was not made properly, and so it collapses on the side. It just makes a bit of a mess out of the 6. So he's going to require a bit more work, whereas the rest of these are in pretty good shape. I do believe I got a bit of a raised face on this one. Yeah, a little bit of a raised face, so you're going to get to see all of the levels of dice. This one is from a very good, very brand new mold that I made. I think it's made 2 dice so far, so this is a really good one and should be easy, but the rest of these are going to require a bit of work. So I wanted you to see what a set that requires a bit of work looks like. So I'm just strapping my respirator on, and I realized that I did not talk about the box. The box is there to catch any dice that happen to go flying. Also, while you're wet sanding, you can see the box is very white on that one side. I recently flipped it over. It will catch any of the spray from the wet sandpaper spinning and kicking out dust. So as it spins, it does throw wet dust in a line straight all the way around. I also cover myself with this old towel. I just cut a hole in it and drape it over my head so my clothes are protected and I'm protected from being covered in any kind of resin muck.
So this is what I look like when I sand dice with my gear and my towel. It keeps my clothes dry, and I've since added a hoodie, so I'm really covered.
Now, let's sand and polish a set of dice.
So first I'm going to get my sandpaper and just get it a little bit wet. As soon as I turn it on, it's going to spit water in like a trail, same way you would if you were riding a bike through a puddle and it spits that water up your back. The spinning drill will do the same thing. So I just protect it with my hand, and I don't know if the camera picks that up, but oh, there it is. Yeah, there's a little trail on my hand from the water spinning off. And it does kind of dry quick, so I keep that little eyedropper. I think I showed you all those tools of what I use. I also keep this bowl of water so that I can dip the dice into it. Sometimes it's easier to just get the whole die wet and sand it. And then it's just a matter of sanding it on the face. I try really, really hard to keep the pressure level, but it's one of those things that even sanding on a flat surface, you're going to apply pressure differently from your thumb to your pinky or your ring finger, wherever you're holding it. Your pressure is going to be applied ever so slightly differently, and that can manifest really quickly on a Dremel when you're holding it against the sandpaper and it's spinning so quickly. The other thing to keep in mind when you're sanding on a Dremel like this is that you want to keep it moving. You'll notice that I'm not holding it still, and I'm not staying in one place for too long. I'm moving up and down, I'm moving left and right. Sometimes I move it around in a circle, and all of those movements are to keep it from getting grooves in the dye. So it will collect grit and grime in spots on the paper, and those can turn into big chunks that will sand grooves into the dye face, and you don't want that. It's the same as, holding it on a piece of sandpaper, sanding flat and going up and down and back and forth, up and down and back and forth. You're moving it in the same motion, so you're going to give it places where it's going to grind deeper. And you can see right here, all those big white speckles are places where there's collected a lot of resin, dust, and water, and it's turned into like a paste. I probably should really change it here, but this is a lower step. And seeing as it's such a low step, as far as like it's the first one, it's the lowest grit, and I'm just going to go higher from here. It's not too dangerous to keep that sandpaper, but the higher grits, it's definitely more noticeable and a lot easier to mess things up if you don't change often. So you can go through quite a bit of sandpaper this way, but the results for me are absolutely worth buying sandpaper. And so now I will just continue to sand each of the faces that need it. I try not to sand every single face at this grit because it means more sanding later. The less you sand now, the less you sand later. It's as simple as that. This one here is my 20, and it had a bit of a raised face. If you remember those from the beginning, I showed you this mold was just dismal is the best way to put it. And so I'm just using some tools to try and remove as much of that flashing as I possibly can so that the surface is smooth. You want that to be as level as possible if you're going to try and save the face, and give your sandpaper as close to a level surface as possible. It's not going to be perfectly level because it's a little bit raised and your proportions are going to get slightly weird. I actually ended up deciding I'm not going to do that one on the Dremel. I'm just going to do it by hand. And so I threw it back into the bowl and grabbed the D6. And I changed my sandpaper like a good little girl, as I should have already a while ago. So it's just a matter of keeping things moving. You'll also notice with the 6 there that I rotated it. You might want to rewind it and check that. Oh, you'll see it again here. I rotate on the face so that it's not being held in the same direction, because again, the way in which I'm applying pressure, you can knock the shape out of whack really quickly, really easily, especially with a D6. Anybody who's sanded masters knows that getting a D6 into shape for molding is the most difficult thing in the world. And sanding it on the Dremel like this is absolutely no different. If you are applying pressure in a specific way, it's going to sand that side faster and you're going to knock things out of whack. I don't know if you caught that, added the sponge. So the Dremel head that's attached is Velcro, and you can attach the sandpaper right to that head. There's also what came in my kit was kind of like a sponge, and it's double-sided Velcro. So it attaches to the part that's attached to the Dremel head, and then the Velcro attaches to the sponge. And that just provides a bit more give when you're sanding on the die. So it can be helpful in some cases, but it's also another element of danger. This is honestly like one of the fastest ways I've found to sand dice, but also one of the fastest ways I've found to really screw up a set of dice. And you'll actually notice if you check out my shop that you'll find dice that say sanding errors.
and it's actually a combination of sanding on the sandpaper here and the polishing, which you'll see in part 2 when we do the polishing, and I'll bring it up again there because those sponges are pretty abrasive as well. But if you are not applying your pressure evenly, especially with this sponge on, it can round out the corners. So if you push down too hard, it's going to have some give around the edges, and you're going to create like essentially a little bowl that the face is sitting in on this sandpaper, and it's going to round your edges. So you have to be really careful to apply firm pressure but gentle pressure all at the same time. It's very complicated, shall we say, and again, easy to screw things up. So I believe I also changed my grit, and so we're sanding now at 2000. That might have been what that sandpaper change was. Actually, it was not to another piece of 1200, but to 1500. Trying to figure out what I'm using here. Nope, this is 15. Okay, so yes, that last one, because the dice were from such a bad mold, those were 1200, and this is now 1500 grit. So at this grit, things start to move a lot faster. It's really just about cleaning up what I did on the lower grits, and we're just further smoothing out the faces. I think because all these clips are sped up, so you get to see the work I did in the span of 5 to 10 minutes. It took me 15 or 20 to smooth everything out on that first grit. If I remember the timing of the clips, because I sped them up, this clip here I think was about 6 minutes in real time, and they just get faster and faster. To sand and polish this set of dice from a mold that was incredibly rough, which meant it needed a lot of extra love and care to be presentable and saleable, it took me about 45 to 50 minutes. And you might be thinking like, oh, I can do that faster by hand. Well, if it's a set that needs a lot of work, it's going to take a lot longer. A set that doesn't require hardly any work and comes out of one of my good molds or a very brand new mold, it takes me maybe 20 minutes to do the whole set tops. And that's assuming, I'm not getting interrupted. I am a mom, I do have kids, I have other responsibilities, and so there are always interruptions, and I tend to also sand a lot of dice at once. So I'm not ever doing just one set at a time. I may sit down for half an hour and sand all of the dice that are in the 1500 grit bin, and then move them all into the 2000 grit and go from there whenever I sit down again. So it's just a matter of how things work for you if you just do one set at a time. As you get more proficient using these tools, you'll be able to sand a lot faster, but you still may have some days where it takes a little bit longer as just an off day. Everybody has them, no big deal. So now I'm switching to 3000 grit here and wetting the sandpaper. I actually only wet sand now for 2000 grit and 3000 grit. If it's the 12 or 1500, I generally am dry sanding simply because it's more difficult to see if all the flaws are gone when it's wet. And as those first steps are the base layer of sanding, everything that's done there dictates how smooth and shiny they come out from the rest of the steps. So if the first step is not done well or overdone, or I missed a spot, it can't be fixed really with those higher grits. The first grit is what's doing the fixing, and the rest is just smoothing over what that first step has done so that we have a nice smooth finish. So if the first step misses something because it's wet and I can't see it, I have to then go back after sanding through all 4 grits, because sometimes it doesn't make itself apparent until we're polishing and everything is shiny and you can really see what's going on. Especially in my case, my cap faces, I use mold release when I make the molds. So those cap faces are matte because I have to sand them anyway. I don't bother to polish them up or clean off the mold release. I just leave it matte and covered in mold release, and it's no big deal. It gets sanded off. But if it's wet and there's water sitting in, maybe I have a slightly concave face because I over pressurized it a little bit,
I can't see that if the water is sitting in that divot. So by doing it dry, I have an easier time seeing if maybe there's a divot where the mold was nicked and now I have to sand something off, or just general bumps or scratches, or maybe I didn't demold it carefully, or I demolded it a little too soon and it was still soft enough that I was able to like scratch it and actually make a dent in it. I need to see those, and if it's wet, it's a lot harder to see at that first step. So I now dry sand there and wet sand these. The other thing with this is you want to make sure that you're moving it around a lot. I'm actually sanding a little bit lazily here. I really should be moving back and forth, up and down and around in a circle a lot more to mimic hand sanding where you would move it in small circles. If you just move it up and down, you can create scratches in it in the same direction because it's just sanding in the same direction over and over again. And it's very easy to mess things up that way. Trust me, I know. I've done it. So this is just a preview of the polishing step. Part 2 is going to show you all the things polishing. We're going to talk about all the ins and outs and what goes on with polishing. So check out part 2, and I will see you in the next one. Additionally, all of the equipment, materials, things you've seen me use are listed in the description, linked in the description, so you can check that. They are affiliate links. I will get a few cents if you make a purchase using those, so just to disclose that. But I will see you in part 2, where we talk all about polishing and finishing these dice with a Dremel. If you haven't already, make sure you hit the like and subscribe so you see all my future videos. I've got some really good ones coming. And make sure you share this with a brand new dice maker because maybe they're tired of hand sanding too. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.